Hi everyone, so in this video we're going to cover dimensions, as I mentioned in the last video, and we're also going to cover line types, how you can make unique line styles. That's obviously something that you can do in Illustrator and something you'll also want to be able to do in Rhino. So let me minimize this if I can. There we go. All right, so and before I cover those topics, I just want to show you how to fix a problem that you might have with hatches. If you have multiple hatches to create an effect like this shadow that is created by a block of black and then also these lines, it could be the case that the order of these objects isn't what you want. So what we can do in that case, again, I'm here looking in the layout and at a viewport. I can double click in the viewport and I can see there are two hatches here and I can toggle between them. I'm going to select the black hatch and then I'm going to type send. I could type send backward, but in this case I'm just going to also type, I'm going to type instead send to back, and that is going to send that black hatch all the way to the back of the drawing order so that this thing displays in front. I could have also, there's also bring to front, and I think that in Illustrator you have these sorts of ordering commands that you can use, and it's the same in Rhino. So if you have two objects and you want one thing to display on top of the other and it's not, then you can grab it and then send it back, or grab the thing you want on top and bring it to the front. Okay, so line types. Let's cover that first because it'll be probably a little quicker. And so I'm going to come in here and let's say, sometimes when you're drawing a section, even if you don't know exactly what the cladding material is going to be or what the framing looks like, you can add a double line in order to start to give your drawing a little more detail, or pseudo detail, let's call it, as a placeholder. But it could give you, suggest that there is a kind of layering here. And so I have a layer here called section line inset. If I turn that off, you can see that the drawing does look better with this double line. I'm not showing, it looks like I'm not showing line types right now, or I'm sorry, line weights. So to do that, I'm going to type print display and toggle that on. Okay, now I have line types and line styles. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. I thought I turned that off, but here you can see that I have this dashed line. I don't know if it's better or worse, but you're definitely going to have situations in which you're going to want to make dashed lines to show things, objects above or below. So how do I make this happen? Okay, well, here I have in the layer panel a line type column, and by default all of your line styles will be set to continuous. However, you can click this and there are going to be some default options in here. So we can select hidden, for example, and then we see dashed lines. However, when I was running through what I wanted to show you here, by default these lines were not showing up, where I couldn't see the pattern. And so we adjust line styles in the Rhino options. So if I type options here, and then scroll up to the top one is annotation styles. Actually, no, line types. Here we go. We want line types. Line type scale. The line type scale is set to 1, and that's fine. And if I go to the top view here, so in the model space, if I turn on the line type continuous hidden, okay, it's not showing up. Now it is showing up here, which is fine. And that's because if we go back to options, there is a scale here, and I believe that, so if I select hidden, the pattern is 0.07, and this is set to inches, so 0.0787 inches. And then the next thing is a space of 0.0787 inches. And that repeats. So you have a line that length, and then a space that length, and so on. We could change this here. We could make it a tighter line dash by adjusting this, right? And hit OK. And I think we have to click in here, and then we click out, and you can see that now we have a slightly smaller line type. We could also go back to options, and if we wanted a bigger space between the dashes, we should be able to adjust the second one. Maybe want this to be like 1. Hit OK. Double click in here, we see that adjusts, and now we have a bigger space in between the dash. If I go back into options, let's put this back to the default. It was like, 0.77 inches, something like that. 0.077. Hit OK. OK, cool. Oops, that didn't. Oh, I just have to double click in here. No, options, go back. Hidden. It didn't take. So let's try this. 0.077. 0.077. And let's come up here. Now that should be okay. I just clicked out of it, clicked back in. That's here. Hit OK. Now we're back to what we had before. If we want this to be visible also in the, let's see, line type display in the model viewport. So line type display is set to yes here. So we need to enable line type display. It's already set to yes. It might be set to no in your Rhino, so you should check it. But then if we go back to options, line type scale, if we change this to something like 10, so we zoom in, we can see that the line types are there, but we're not seeing them from a certain angle, or a certain distance rather. So if we come back and maybe change this to 20, now when I first click out, nothing happens, but if I then like scroll in and adjust the view, they get a little bit bigger. If I change this to 50, hit OK. Now scroll. Okay, now they're quite visible. So that in the options, that scale is affecting how the line type is displayed in the model space, the modeling window. But it doesn't change anything here, because in the viewports we're dealing with absolute displays, right? What we're dealing with is this dimension, this 0.07 inches. And that's how it will display. Now, obviously, we could, let's say we want to make a new line type, our own. We could make line type 1. Can we rename it? Yep, if we double click in here, let's call it hidden 2. So we'll make hidden 2. And by default, it's continuous, and it has just one number here. So we're going to make a dashed line by, let's say, like 0.25, and then 0.5, 0.05, and then let's say we wanted a longer dash. We could say 0.5, 0.05, and let's say we wanted another space, comma. I'm putting commas in here. Sorry, it's like 0.25, then comma, we want a space of 0.05, then comma, we want another line that's a little bit longer, that's 0.05, and then we want another space that's 0.2. So you can see that now we're making this custom line type. And so by adding commas and more variables, you get these, you can get these custom patterns. So if I come up to dash dot, it shows you an example of this, right? And the values that are producing the line get underlined automatically by Rhino, and the values, which are spaces, are not underlined. So this is how we can make a custom line type. So let's say we just wanted a line type with longer dashes. We could 0.1, comma, 0.1, okay. Maybe it's 0.2 and 0.2, 0.3, something like that. Okay, that looks pretty good as our hidden 2. It'll be a contrast with hidden. We click OK here. And then if we take this layer, section line inset, we can change it from hidden here in the line type to hidden 2, hit OK. And you can see now we have these bigger lines, longer dashes and bigger spaces. So that's how we can adjust line types. We can use the default, we can scale them in the model viewport, and we can create our own. So what about dimensions? One of the great advantages of using Rhino for drawing over Illustrator is that you can put in dimension styles. So by default, if we just double click into the model, into the detail, I can type dim for dimension, and we click 2 points. And okay, so we have this. So this is 23.06 feet. If I double click in here, let's just measure the distance, and we get 23.06 feet. All right, but this dimension style is not very attractive. It's too big. We probably want feet and inches. So how do we get a better dimension style? Just going to delete that. Again, we need to type options. And then in annotation styles, which is the top option in options, if we just click annotation styles, we were using the default dimension style. We can select new, and there are going to be some built-in dimension styles that we can build off of. So I recommend starting with foot-inch architectural. And if we select that, and we can change its name, let's just call it foot-inch architectural. Now let's call it foot-inch architectural 1. Hit OK, and now we have foot-inch architectural 1. If we want that to be the default style, the style that Rhino begins with anytime we make a dimension line, we can make it the current style and hit OK. So now I'm going to double click in here, type dimension, and click from this point to this point. Okay, great. And now that is a very legible dimension. Let's say we want to dimension something on an angle. There is a dim aligned. So it's the second one if you type DIM, dim aligned. And this is now going to give us a dimension that's aligned with the angle of the object that we're dimensioning. If I just type dimension like this, then, which is also useful at times, right? I can measure a distance, I guess, let's say normal to the object. That's also true for, it snaps to horizontal and vertical, or whatever your construction plane is. So what I could do here is, let's say if I wanted to know that dimension, I can, if it's more vertical and less horizontal, then it's going to give me a vertical dimension. So, so that's how you use just default dimension. But then if we wanted another dimension, if we wanted to know show the length of this, dim aligned, and that is going to let us get that. Now there might be moments when you want to override the actual dimension here. So 21 feet 2 7/8. We could adjust in the style the accuracy of it. So actually, if you double click this, you can. If I double click that, I'm getting things coming up. So if I wanted this to, I can put in whatever dimension I want. I could call that, actually, if I come here in the override box, I could just make that 3 feet, which of course is incorrect. If I don't want that at all, then if I want the default, I use these characters, the greater than and less than sign. That is what tells Rhino to use the actual measurement. But let's say I'm thinking, okay, 21 feet 3 inches is better than showing the actual dimension of 2 7/8. Then I can come in here and adjust that. Now, if you change the dimension, right, it's not going to update. So you would have to go back and see what that new, you would have to come back here, put in these greater than and less than parentheses, and then you could find out the new dimension. So let's just undo all of that, redo that. So here I might want just to say like this is 23 feet. That might be enough for what I want to show. That might be enough accuracy, and we could do something like that. Now, very often, you might do a string of dimensions, especially if you're going from, say, like from floor to floor. So dimension, we could do what's known as a dimension string. So we could start here, here, and then we could come down to this. And we could go from here to here and come down to this. And this is what's known as a dimension string. Okay, let's look at some other issues with dimensions. So let me just go back to the actual measurement here and delete these guys. Okay, so these this drawing is at 1/8 scale. So the dimension string looks very appropriately scaled for this. Now, if we go into the model view, you can see that it's not looking so great. So again, if we go back to options, just like with the line type display, if we come into, let's go down to annotation styles, and now click into this dimension style, there's a model space scale. So I could knock this down. So it's at 96 by default. I could go to 48, hit apply. You can see it shrinks down a little bit. I need something really low for this, which is like 12. Hit apply. Okay. And that looks much better. So again, I could make this really small for the model space. Like I could make it, let's say 2, hit apply. Okay, now things are super micro. And if I go back to page 1, it's not going to affect it, right? Because the style itself is set up for printing, and that printing is going to, that's going to use absolute dimensions. The issue that you might run into is that if I have the dimension string, you might end up using different layers and different dimension styles for different drawings. But if you want to use the same dimensions and then like zoom in, that can be a bit of an issue. So for example, as I let's say zoom out on these things, if I try to have this dimension style use the same dimension style, it's too big. And then if I zoom in on this object, right, it might be okay, but at a certain point it might seem a little too small because it's going to be the same size from drawing to drawing. Now, one way you could get around this, if you didn't want 2 dimension styles, is that you could, in the model space, let's say set up a pretty good scale. Well, actually, let me just look. So now we have this micro scale in the model space. So let's go back to default here. And I'm sorry, annotation styles. You can see if we come to the top and click annotation styles, there's this option over here called enable layout space scaling. And that's what's telling Rhino to use the absolute units that you set up in the dimension style itself to for the layouts. If I unclick this and hit OK, it affects nothing here. But now if I go back to the layouts, you can see it's using the same scale as the model space, which means that as I zoom in here, it's being shown larger, right? And when I'm zoomed out, so it's like an absolute scale for the dimension, right? It's not, it's an absolute, well, let's say gives the dimension string a model space scale, and then the viewport basically respects that model space scale. If you put on dimension, or if you put on dimension scaling, basically it's taking whatever you have in the dimension string settings, like here, like the height of the text, for example, the height of the tick marks and all of these things, which can be adjusted if you want. If you use dimension styling, basically these become sort of, let's say, the real world scale for the layout. Otherwise, if you take off scaling, then you get the model space scale. So here, if I adjust this back to like 12 or maybe 10, this is the model space scale, but now the model space scale is what's being shown in all of the views, right? And so sometimes that can be desirable because you want the dimensions to maybe get smaller as you move away. Just to wrap this up, I'll show you if we go back and type options and turn off that layout space scaling, then suddenly that gets a little too big, right? So it's just a choice. Like if you have separate layers with unique dimension styles, then maybe you always want this layout space scaling to be checked. But if you want the dimensions to have an absolute scale and they get bigger and smaller in different viewports, then you want to unclick that, right? And then you can maintain that scale across viewports. I think that pretty much wraps up a lot of the basics of drawing in Rhino. With this, I'll just show you one more thing. I do have this layer called section hatch yellow. It's not yellow, so if I wanted to finish this drawing off by giving it let's say a color in the hatch, right now it's, despite the layer name, everything's being shown black. So to fix that, I need to double click into the layout or the detail, and now I have detail print color, and I can select that, and let's give this a yellow color. Okay, cool. Now this is being shown in yellow, and I could print this. Now let's look at printing, see if this works by default. Okay, so Control P from the detail, and let's say I want to print it to a PDF. By default, things are not looking so great. In this case, it should be an easy fix. It's an 11 by 17, and I want to select tabloid and landscape, and boom, that pretty much fixes it. And then I could print this as a PDF, and it should pop over, and I'm trying to grab it. There we go. So it looks okay. And then I could go from there. And do we have all of our line weights and all of that? Yeah, so that's all there. Now, when I'm printing this, you should be, or when you're printing, you should be careful. You can actually toggle between vector and raster. So if it's a PDF, you probably want vector. You can also print this as an image file if you want. If you wanted to incorporate it into, I don't know, if you wanted to take it into Photoshop. And so you could specify, again, you're going to want to, if it's an 11 by 17 format, you could start with, 11 pixels, I'm sorry, 17 by 11. So you want the correct proportion, and then, you want to build up from there. So 100, something like that. And view output extents. There we go. We want this to be extents. And then we would even bump this up larger, I think, so that you get a higher resolution image. And of course, you could just print it to a printer, but probably you're going to want to save it as a PDF. So, as it has all of the standard sizes here, Arch A, Arch B, Arch C, in PDF. So you can print it much like you print from the Rhino window. So I think that covers a lot of ground, hopefully. If I think of other things, then I will show them in future tutorials. If you have questions, just ask me in Studio, or send me an email if there's something that isn't making sense for you. Thanks.